let's talk about SJA2 Skulls and Crossbows, which is an adventure for Spelljammer from 2nd edition ED and D. It has the beautiful picture of a hammerhead ship crewed by zombies, I think, or something, by Brom, which I use for Augustar's games, kind of, I guess, thumbnail banner. Yeah, so Nigel Findley is an interesting author who I'm going to take a short break from doing Spelljammer reviews. I'm going to do one more, though, in the near future of another Nigel Findley book, but I'm going to do something else in between. He's an interesting journeyman Canadian author who actually, like Curtis Scott of SJA2, died fairly young, died in '95, not long after, he was still publishing, he's still writing at the time. But yes, this is the second adventure for Spelljammer. The first, Wild Space, by Alan Varney, I think, is basically not great. It has some really interesting stuff in it. It has a really good concept dungeon at one point. I wouldn't say amazing, but really good concept dungeon. A couple of good ideas, but it's very linear, very much scene-based and event-based, rather than anything you actually explore or decide on. It's just stuff happens. You, as the players, go and do them because the DM has said so. Skulls and Crossbows is a bit different. It is a collection of adventures. It consists of a booklet. It consists of a poster of deck plans. The relevant thing here is these are functionally dungeon maps. It also has a trifold fold out, which has a couple of ship plans and it has a ship plan. It has 2 location plans. The Outpost and the Bar Sinister. It has an NPC summary table and a monster summary table. So it is a collection of 15, I think, adventures. 18 adventures. 18 adventures. One of which I think is actually literally just a very brief vignette encounter, and a couple of which are fairly short. The longest of them are 7 pages, I think, of triple column. So we're talking, which it means that the longest are the length of G1, the Steading of the Hill Giants. So what is it? Why is it a collection? What's the theme? The theme is sort of that you get a letter of marque from Prince Andrew of the Rock of Bral, and you're allowed to go and attack pirates, and there's a particular wanted list to go after. You're given 5 ships to go after: the Barracuda, the Raven, the Frostfire, the Nex, and the Rampage. And you get some details about some of them. You're asked by the Order of Transcendent Thought, or whatever it is. What are they called? The Pots, anyway. The anti-slavery guys. Now you get a few genres of story here, or adventure. So much like SJA1 Lost Ships, the emphasis is on space adventures. There are a couple of asteroidal adventures and things like that, but what's interesting is you can see that Greenwood with Lost Ships and Findley with Skull and Crossbows they're both under the impression that Spelljammer is a campaign that happens in space. By that I mean in the vacuum of Wild Space or the Phlogiston, and most of it involves dealing with ships. And this is quite different to Lost Ships, but the similarity is that Lost Ships, a lot of the encounters and ideas there involve you coming across a ship in space, and here a lot of them happen with you coming across a ship in space. And the dungeon environments are ships. There's a section called Relics and Hulks, which is you go on a ship. It's one of these floor plans. You adventure around it like it's a dungeon. So this is the thing I've kind of talked about before in the Spelljammer discussions I've had, is there's evidently an impression early on that Spelljammer is a game where you might well travel between realm space, between Toriel, Greyhawk and Kryn, and do stuff on those planets, and run adventures that are normal adventures on those planets. And then you use things like Skull and Crossbows and Lost Ships to create linking material in between stuff. This is kind of a step beyond that, in the sense there is an overall theme which might occupy your characters continuously without them going on other adventures. But it's for levels 6 to 10. There's plenty of stuff at the lower half of that, a bit of stuff at the higher half, much like Lost Ships. it is aimed at parties who are level 6 and above. Spelljammer starts as a mid-level campaign. We've talked a bit about, and I'm obviously running a low-level Spelljammer campaign on the channel, so you can do that. But the defaults are mid-level, and Spelljammer itself consists of meeting ships, not exploring planets. That shifts. The Findley product I want to talk about, Practical Planetology, is about exploring other planets, and so that's maybe gives the Star Trek side to the equation, which I think is a valid and useful part of it. So the 5 chapters, anyway, I'd say this, and then I'll say the kind of what the things within the subgenres of vignette or adventure within them are: pirates and corsairs, relics and hulks, starfaring races, monsters of the void, and rewards and revenge. Now, pirates and corsairs, of course, is the main chunk, if you like, of you're going after ships as a privateer to get rid of these what's it called? You know, you're going after these ships to get rid of pirates in space, and that's easy enough. And they consist of Letters of Marque is technically the first mini adventure with a very small obstacle, but then so technically there's 19 adventures. But yeah, Flying Colours, you fight a hammer ship, and it has terms of surrender. You can see there, giving details of how things work in terms of when they'll surrender or what happens if you surrender. Small package trade. You come into contact with a guy called Torgun Betts. He will come up later. This is one thing we'll find, is that there are adventures that link together, and Betts wants you to carry something, but it turns out it's all part of a scam. Pirate Worm, you are attacked by a radiant dragon who likes to steal stuff from ships. Bloody Vikings is again one of the bounties. Fire and Ice is again one of the bounties. Quite a tough one. It's giants. They can make it level 6 to 8, but giants throwing rocks at you in space can be pretty painful. Violent Death is you explore one ship which has been wrecked, and then you find out it's one of the bounties is waiting nearby to attack you, while you take a look at this wrecked ship. And Forgotten But Not Gone is a mind flayer ship which has been abandoned. There's some ghosts on it, and that introduces you to something has happened with mind flayers trying to meet people and do stuff. Then Sojourn Among the Stars, at this point we're into relics and hulks, by the way, there is a ruined dragonfly with a chaotic neutral lich on it who you can befriend. So that is, you can see there's lots of things which are kind of combat or dungeon. Then we get a potential negotiation one where you can befriend this lich. The Brain Trade is mind flayers, and there is a ship going around. I think that the mind flayers are trying to make an alliance with the Nyogi. So basically, again, combat. Then we get an interesting thing, again with Nyogi, but chiefly there are 2 adventures called Void Elves and Monarch Armada, which are linked to do with drow in space. And them trying to get out, using modified elven armada ships, and trying to build an empire in space. I should say the internal art is generally fine. It's generally fine. It's line art. It is by Paul Abrams. It's nothing special. One reason I haven't really thought to show anything yet. And the Monarch Armada, when you actually are on board the Monarch Armada in the second of these adventures, if you continue investigating these drow in space, is not a tiny ship actually, and there's a little bit of looping in the sense you can enter the main block a couple of ways. I'll make some general comments on ship dungeons in a minute. That's one of the longer ones. Encounter tables, quite detailed stuff. It feels spiritually, it definitely has an element of D3 to it, or something like that. Time Capsule, you meet a Thri-kreen, but then there's 3. These are 3 linked adventures pretty much. Time Capsule, you rescue a Thri-kreen from the Phlogiston, and it turns out he's been there for thousands of years. Back when the Thri-kreen were expansionary, hyper-religious group in space. The Outpost, you then go and find out about, you're hired by basically a evil but okay mind flayer who needs brains but will basically abide by a deal with you to go and explore the Outpost of the Elders. So you've got this kind of ancient race who've disappeared and no one knows anything about. The Outpost is a small dungeon you can do stuff in. Then Jihad is the Thri-kreener in space, trying to take over places, and you basically probably drawn into defending the Rock of Bral potentially. You get 2 ship cards with that in the body of the text, the Thorn ship and the Leaf ship, which are Thri-kreen ships. And you meet your old friend who you rescued, who's leading this. Billy Bones is a tiny encounter with skeletons in space. Parasite is Death Shades, who are this new monster who thrive on causing chaos, possessing and causing chaos. They're an undead. Have ruined a ship and can infect your ship. And then we get to X and Kane, which set up a kind of an end run, which is where you are asked by Prince Andrew to go after a ship used by the 10th Pit, and that makes you the target of an assassin you've heard of the work of, who is also one of your targets, Kane, because the 10th Pit, who are this evil faction, hire him. So yeah, that's the summary of all the things that are in it, and there are a couple of things you can pick up from that. One, that you have lots of space dungeons, which are ships, and 2, there are a couple of linking threads. There is this stuff where you hear about this Kane guy, you hear about him in an adventure early on as well. He ends up coming out at the end. Your arm is twisted by Prince Andrew into going after an enemy faction, which draws the attention of this dangerous guy to you. But then you kind of want to meet him anyway to get your payday. You've got the Void Elves, the Drow, and you have the Thri-kreen, and you have Torgon Betts, who comes up in his own adventure, and then later in the Kane adventure. So you have a bunch of links over these 19 adventures, including the faction, the Order of Thought, Pragmatic Order of Thought, who hire you. Now, let's just say what's weaknesses. Findley isn't a great stylist. He is better than Scott, who I recently reviewed. It's all very functional, but he is prone, and he did write a couple of Spelljammer novels. He is prone to writing long boxed text, 4 or 5 paragraphs in places, and also a few bits of in-world fiction which are basically unnecessary. They're a waste of space. I'm not going to read them to show you how bad they are. You can, they're not good enough. There is also a habit of his in the box text, and if by box text we mean a description of a room, we do need that, and it's fine if there's a bit of description in there, but there's often stuff where he starts telling players what's going on. So where there's a mystery, and you are basically told what it is at some level, either in the box text or in a room description. And let's see if I can find an example. What's that? A dull thudding noise coming from within the coffin. That's a borderline example. Or this another borderline example, but shows the problem I mean with sort of overwritten stuff. No, wait a moment, it's hard to be sure against the chaos of the Phlogiston, but isn't there a dim, flickering light shining through those portholes? Yeah, the canvas is partially burned. Someone apparently tried to light a fire here, but it seems to have gone out by itself, trying to destroy the ship and the evidence of what happened. That is leading the players, that is telling the players what to think, and because he's not going to lie to you in those cases, you're essentially reducing the mystery of the dungeon, and the attempt by players to understand what the dungeon is oversimplified. Now, the dungeons themselves are, generally speaking, ship plans. Oh, you're on board, that's you never go on board a Thorn ship, I think, but like a Wasp ship or something, or a Mine Spider, or a Drakkar, or most notably the Monarch Armada. And basically, most of these are not terribly exciting dungeons because they are literally very linear. They are, generally speaking, a single corridor going down on one axis, and then there are rooms coming off it. That is how most of these ships are. The Monarch Armada is slightly more interesting. There are a couple of entrance points, but it's still basically quite linear with doors on either side that you go down. And a comparison that I've talked about on this channel, in terms of a ship dungeon, is the Fortunate Son in Night of the Shark, which, whilst still very much ship-like, has multiple points of entry to different areas, and is just a bit less linear. There's a couple of loops through the dungeon, and while still keeping this fairly orthodox ship plan. And I think that's important, that it does that, because it means that the players can do different things and need to think about how the map works. On these, you generally don't. The actual dungeons, so far as they go, the kind of exploring the ruined ships or fighting enemies, are fine, and the Monarch Armada one is quite good. So that's the kind of summary of the dungeons. I think there's a weakness in terms of the way the maps work. The Outpost, which is maybe the only properly orthodox dungeon, is only 5 rooms, but it's not completely linear. There are can you get no? I know you always have to go through the central room. I don't think you can go around the outside of this tetrahedron. But yeah, so yeah, they're not particularly exciting maps. Findley is not a mapper, I think, generally. His content is good. The idea that they're often odd remains of things, or you can turn up an extra danger or an extra opportunity by exploring another room. That's common. But he is not breaking records. He is a journeyman. Greenwood is much better in that specific sense at just saying, you go here and there's this weird thing. This is an interesting idea. I think Findley is less strong at that. What Findley gets, though, and I think this is why this is one of my favourite Spelljammer resources, is he gets a sense of, he gets space opera. He gets the idea that Spelljammer is really, it's not sci-fi, it's space fantasy, but really what we mean by that is sometimes it's just fantasy, but with a weird skin, I guess. But thematically, it's best pushed into a space opera mode where exploration, drama, and wonder are the big categories of play, or big categories of emotion in play. And I think that the way that he has, the links he has, the way he links adventures shows that he gets this. What I mean is, there's a couple where you're dealing with like Neogi making alliances with people. Okay, so that's kind of space civilizations. Okay, well, the Neogi are a genuinely good invention. But then you connect it into stuff like, one of those is these drow they're making friends with, and these are not the first drow in space, but the first drow you've met, and they've got this big ship, and they've got all these plans, and they've got allies, and so the idea of a big sweeping, your Romulans or whatever, that sense, that stuff, remember, in Star Trek is really on the operatic side. And or you can think Star Wars. Think about the Vuong, what's they called? There's an external civilization coming in, back up into like expanded universe 20 and so, but books after that point. Is Vector Prime part of that? I think it is. And yeah, and then you have this other thing, and this interlinks with some of this other stuff, like a Mind Flayer, but who you can negotiate with, who's acceptable to you, still evil, but who wants you to go to this ancient civilization. That's very space opera, isn't it, again? But that is also connected to people who sort of know about the Elders, but don't know anything about the Outpost or anything, the Thri-kreen. And so the Thri-kreen, you have this really interesting encounter where you can make friends with someone who you later realise is, maybe not a maniac, but is very dangerous, because he said, look, when I was last here, we Thri-kreen were expanding our influence across the stars and helping people to follow the truth, and now people aren't. We need to go and improve this, which leads to war. But maybe you can talk him back from that based on your discovery of things about the Elders, based on your discovery of other things in space, based on your friendship with Tick, I think his name is. So this sense of these interlinking, galaxy spanning, and by galaxy spanning, obviously you're very often in a small area, but this sense of a galaxy spanning story, of a Babylon 5 kind of story, of a of a Dominion War kind of story, of a in Star Wars terms, some of these kinds of like, I've got to go to a weird Jedi ruin kind of story. That sort of theme and feel is very strong. And the actual thing itself, the letters and mark thing, 4 of those are just what more or less one-off encounters you have in the first 2 chapters of. You don't have to do it in a linear way, of course, but in the first 2 chapters of this, there are just 4 of them are functionally one-off encounters where you find something. And you can, Findley is good usually about saying, here's 3 ways you could get this adventure into your game. So, I mean, in some cases, small package trade is just you're ashore and you're offered a job. That's because that's the story it is. Pirate Worm, you've heard tales. A number of ships have gone missing in a certain area of space, or it's an encounter. It's an encounter in an asteroid belt. Or again, let's find one more example of that. Violent Death. The PCs hear rumours that a ruined ship is drifting in a certain area. They hear rumours that a large pirate vessel is attacking shipping in a certain area, but there are no actual witnesses. PCs are travelling in wild space and then stumble upon an inert ship as a random encounter. Those are very simple, by the way, and any DM could supply them, but when you think about linearity, it's kind of nice to feel like the designer understands you might have different needs from this material, and he's saying, hey, here's different ways that you can make this work in the context of a campaign. But yeah, 4 of them are basically standalones, and the other one, Kane, you hear about him, and then at the end you essentially have he's coming after you. That's a fun twist, or he may be coming after you at least. It's a fun twist. It's nothing special. That is the weakest of the threads. I think the Thrycreen, the Void Elves, and Torgon Betts, the way he comes up in his 2, those are both a bit more fun, I think. I think the way it brings you into contact with the Illithids is clever as well, as I've already mentioned. I think the resources that come with it, the deck plans and stuff actually are really useful. I approve of that. I think the ideas about how to kind of get that stuff in space is good. I think what's missing still is the sense that you don't just need to be running published adventures on the 3 main planets. And of course, at this point, they've already published Realm Space. There already is a system out there that you could go to and do stuff in, in terms of a very detailed system. And I think the idea of having planetary adventure as part of what you do, and also city adventure on the Rock of Braal, they haven't really got to that yet by this point. This is still 1990. This is very early on. They will, so SJA2 is practical planetology, SJA2 is Rock of Braal, and I think those help fill out something something more interesting and something more fully orbed. There is a couple of small other points I could make, just in basically not criticism, but one is that he calls crystal spheres crystal shells because he's obviously got an early style guide, and his editor, who might be Steve Shend, Steve Shend to Dan Brown, has not actually bothered correcting it. That's strange. Probably it was locked and ready to print before the box set came out, and no one picked up the fact that these things in draft had different words. Very, very, very small and irrelevant detail, but I think it's a sign of a line that probably always did struggle for identity. Anyway, that is my thoughts on Skull and Crossbows. If you have read it or played in it, some of those adventures, tell me what you think in the comments. As I say, I would say it's one of the better resources for Spelljammer. It has some of the same bitty quality that other things in the line do, but it's interesting. But yeah, tell me your thoughts in the comments. Till next time.